Hello, I'm Dee,
And I'm Max.
and this is Movies to the Max. This video is about Oppenheimer. We chose Oppenheimer because in a list of best movies of last year, it was listed in many as the number one. Okay.
And now for the fast facts. The cast is Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. for the main actors. It was released July 21st, 2023. Takes place from 1925 to 1958. It was nominated for 13 Academy Awards, and including Best Actor and Best Picture, and it won 7. And the box office was $953.8 million. Cillian Murphy is known for playing the Scarecrow. Robert Downey Jr. is known for playing Iron Man.
So it's almost a Marvel versus a DC. Or DC versus Marvel, whatever. So, some of my first notes is that, and I didn't look this up, but I'm kind of curious, so at least in this movie, Oppenheimer was often kind of referred to as a modern-day Prometheus, which, for those of you who don't know who Prometheus was, in Greek mythology, I believe it's Greek, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and brought it to Earth. And then he was punished for bringing fire to people by having to push a rock for the rest of his life. That was one of the first notes I made.
Something interesting that I made note of, because we watched this movie twice. During the first watching, we kind of had a question because they show images of Oppenheimer seeing like different realities and stuff, and our question was Oppenheimer schizophrenic? And we looked it up, and yes, he was diagnosed with a different kind of schizophrenia. Like it was known as something else back then, but in today's modern medical world, he would have been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Yeah, so this movie is going to be a little harder to talk about than our last one in some ways. There are kind of three timelines going on that they're kind of showing, not at the same time, obviously, but they'll show like a bit of one timeline and then go to another timeline. And then they'll go back to like one of the original timelines that they were showing, and that timeline will have like almost like a little, kind of almost like a flashback or different part of its timeline. So especially during our first watching of it, I know, at least for me, the first watching, I was kind of confused for about the first hour and a half of this movie, and it's a 3-hour movie. Your thoughts on that, Max?
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely a little bit confusing, just kind of navigating the different plot lines and stuff. And in a little bit, we'll talk about it when they're doing the like little hearing. They don't even say what the hearing is about at first.
Yeah, it's almost the end of the film. So let's talk about that now, at least. So the three timelines that are going on is that there is this hearing. I put it as the word trial, but it's more of a hearing. Do we want to go ahead and say what it's for?
Yeah.
It was so that he could keep his security clearance.
Yeah.
And then there was what I put it in my notes as, I put FF as further future. So there's this future where one of the other characters, Robert Downey Jr., plays Louis Strauss, and Louis Strauss in this film, and this is, at this time, this is a historical film, is being considered for a cabinet appointment. I didn't write down what cabinet appointment he was up for. Did you? It was some sort of maybe trade commissions, or I don't think that's necessarily important as part of our discussion. It is noteworthy that most of the stuff that's dealing with that trial is in black and white, which was interesting because anybody that would have been watching that trial, or it's not a trial, it was more of a hearing, that would have been watching parts of that hearing at the time, it would have been in black and white. And then the third storyline that's going on is a past that's before this hearing of everything that's leading up to the formation of the Manhattan Project, including and up to what's called Project Trinity. And for those of you who don't know, that was the testing of the atomic bomb. And you even get a little bits of what in that particular timeline you get the dropping of the bomb and what happened just after. So those are the three timelines that are going on.
And we can kind of get into how the movie starts. And I made a very interesting note here. It's going to come back later. The movie starts on a rainy day.
Yeah, go ahead. So, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
So before the movie starts, we get the quote of Prometheus. Prometheus stole the fire from the gods, and he was punished. And then the movie starts on a rainy day with Oppenheimer kind of looking into the rain, and then it goes straight into the hearing after that, I think.
Yeah, so the first bit that you're introduced to Robert Oppenheimer, whose introduction to Oppenheimer, and he's in this.
Right now,
he's in the hearing.
The first shot that you get of him, that's him in Cambridge.
Right. And I think it's funny because shortly thereafter he's talking to another well-known scientist of the time, Bourne, I think his name was.
That's a little bit later.
So that's right, at the very beginning, because he talks to him about.
That's after my note about the cyanide in the apple.
Right. Yes. Well, why don't you talk about that then?
Well, we get the shot of Oppenheimer at Cambridge, and then Oppenheimer in his hearing, and then we get the next shot of, I don't know how to spell his name, Strauss in his hearing, and then it goes back to Cambridge where Oppenheimer is studying under Patrick Black. I wrote that name down. And they talk about it later about how he respected him, but he was frustrated with him because he was failing in the lab. And so he tried to poison him by putting cyanide in an apple that was put on his desk.
Oppenheimer was definitely being shown as more of a theorist than a practicalist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to kind of use that term. I know it's not an actual real word, but I do think that it's that it actually kind of even goes into what goes on in the future, that he's more focused on theories and proving his theories than he is about what happens practically because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Can I say what Niels Bohr said about him at this point now?
It was Max.
Max Bohr? Is that what he says about him?
Yeah. He had a class with another teacher whose name I didn't write down. He had the only good question in the class. And then the next shot is of that teacher that was doing the...
Bourne was a... was like a traveling speaker.
That teacher that is in the classroom, or that is in the classroom with with Patrick Black, is talking to Oppenheimer and tells him to go study under Bourne.
No, Bourne is the one that's doing the lecture, and they tell him to go study under someone else over in Europe.
Yes, I didn't write that name down though.
Yeah, I didn't either, but that's fine because basically he tells because Oppenheimer's not that great at math, but again, the practical portions of science wasn't what interested Oppenheimer. It was the theories, and Bourne said algebra is like sheet music. Physics is about being able to hear the music. And he asks Oppenheimer, can you hear the music? And you get kind of this really pretty scene of him hearing music and this different world that he sees. It was here that I wrote down just some kind of interesting, what I thought were some kind of interesting facts about Oppenheimer.
This during this scene where you're getting shots of him like studying and stuff, there's a scene of him in a gallery of sorts, and it's a shot of a picture, then a shot of his face, then it zooms in on the picture, then it zooms in on his face, shot for shot from Ferris Bueller. I remember this scene from Ferris Bueller is where Ferris Bueller's friend is looking at a picture and it zooms in on the picture and zooms in on the friend's face. I thought that was hilarious. I don't think it was supposed to be hilarious. I don't even know if it's from Ferris Bueller, but that's what I thought of.
So yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right on that. Okay, yep. So I wrote down just some kind of interesting things. So you kind of get a little bit of Oppenheimer again. Early years, he's speaking on a lecture circuit, and he's speaking in Germany at the time. And I just wrote down that he learned to speak Dutch in like 6 weeks.
Yes, I wrote that down.
He was Jewish. He may have been a communist or at least a communist sympathizer. At the very least, he had very left-leaning political ideologies. And I wrote this down, and we don't find this out till later. He knew Einstein, and he could read Sanskrit, which I wrote that down too. Which again, we don't find that out till a little later, but I just kind of found it interesting. And any kind of notes about any of that at this point, or shall we move on a little bit?
He was teaching about dying stars, by the way.
Yes. Which at the time was very theoretical. And the movie skips back and forth so much, sometimes it's easier to talk about things as you kind of think of them than it is to talk about them when they show up in the movie, because at some point, this whole theory is boiling down to basically what ends up being the atomic bomb. This theory that of fission and fusion and all this is basically coming down to, it's all theories, but it's coming down to a building of a bomb, and it becomes a race to who can build the bomb first, whether that be the Germans or the Americans. The Russians really weren't in that field of study doing much of that, and the Japanese weren't either, really. So at some point, they talk about how far ahead the Germans are at making this bomb, and Oppenheimer says that they have one big advantage, and that is that Hitler called theoretical physics a Jewish science, which I found terribly interesting. I didn't really have any more to say on it than that, but I just found it interesting.
Going back to a little bit of the plot of the film, this is where we meet Frank and Jackie. Frank is Oppenheimer's brother, and Jackie is Frank's not fiance yet, girlfriend
at the time, at least soon
and
to be.
they're at a communist party meeting.
It is interesting. I don't know if you wrote this name down, but it is important to the storyline later. This is also where we meet Chevalier.
Which is such an interesting last name. I think it's
must
his
be
last
French.
name.
Yeah, I think his first name is Hauck.
Something like
that. Um, yeah, we get to meet Chevalier, and then you wrote down we also get to meet Jean Tetlock.
Yes, I didn't write her last name down, but yes, this is where we meet Jean.
Who was probably, at least in the film, one of the first female interests that Oppenheimer has.
This is where I wrote down that he could read Sanskrit because they get kinky in bed and they start reading the book. They start reading books to each other. Books are happening while banging is happening.
So Max is referring to a scene where Oppenheimer and Jean Tatlock are being intimate, and Jean makes him read this Sanskrit book, and it has to do with.
I remember the line, "I am become death." That's all.
Destroyer of
worlds. And that comes back
it comes back later.
In this scene, they go to see a dying star, or at least that's what I think they're going to go do, because they go into the desert for the night. There's a little mini storm going on, and I think they're going to go see a dying star.
I think at the very least they're
Frank Oppenheimer and.
Oh, I don't know his name. I didn't write his name down either. Another one of the scientists that's kind of important. You don't really get to see much of him. He's kind of in and out a little bit. So I guess based on your next note, though, that what I'm about to say is kind of important because the next kind of main section that happens for me is after that, and that is they're now at some school in America.
Mm-hmm.
Princeton, maybe? I don't know. No, Berkeley. They're in Berkeley.
Yeah.
They're at Berkeley. And Oppenheimer's basically teaching a class at Berkeley. And next to him are some engineers that are working on this chain reaction, this splitting of the atom. And Oppenheimer says it can't happen. He's got the math to prove it. Theory says this can't happen.
Well, the Germans split the atom.
The Germans split the atom first. That's true, but Oppenheimer thinks it can't be done. He says the math theory says that it can't happen, and they end up splitting it in America too. And it says the theory will only take you so far. I found that kind of interesting.
I wrote down September 1st, 1939. Is that when they split the atom?
I believe that's when they split the atom. You've written down some stuff that's more in the story, but I am going to talk about this momentarily, that at this point, once they've split the atom, he knows that it could be used to make something destructive. And they begin working on the building of a bomb without him knowing. He's not allowed to participate in these meetings, in this kind of initiation of it, a lot because of his politics, his left-wing politics. So did you want to kind of go on? So I think that actually kind of goes on to what things that you're going to be talking about next.
Well, this is in the story where he meets Kitty, his future wife. She has a husband at this time, but they talk about later how she's going to divorce him because in the story how it happens is he meets Kitty at this party at this place that he's staying, and then it kind of cuts to him and Jean where he's breaking it off with Jean, and he talks about how she's already pregnant and she's going to get a divorce and they're going to get married before she even starts showing. So
did you have anything else that you want to say at that point then? Because I kind of go on to the next.
I go on to the next thing too.
So the next thing that we see, so this is post Manhattan Project, but pre Straws being considered for cabinet. You see Oppenheimer in front of a. It's some sort of I don't know if we're ever really told. I think if you knew the history,
I think
that
they're
happened.
trying to decide if.
Is it some kind of a Senate hearing or
Oh,
congressional?
I don't know.
You're not exactly sure what kind of a. It's some sort of group
I
that's
think
getting
so.
together about deciding whether to continue working on super nuclear explosions, not just an atom bomb, but the next step up, the hydrogen bomb, and they talk about isotopes and
Straws thinks that
straws.
they're very
They're very
important.
important and has some sort of like leeway into whatever he's doing is gonna. These isotopes are gonna help his career, and Oppenheimer kind of makes a big joke about the isotopes, which rubs
Well,
Straws the wrong
I
way.
kind of want to say exactly what he says because they go over it multiple times in the film. He says, "Are they more useful than a sandwich? Because, or could you use a sandwich to make nuclear bombs? You could, and you do."
Are they more important than a sandwich? Yeah, so it really kind of makes a fool. The whole thing shows that he's basically kind of making a fool of Straws at this moment. And Straws holds this grudge for years.
Yeah.
It's not the first time. It might be the first time, but it's definitely not the last because you also get. Is it now or is it a little bit later? There again. This is not necessarily as put together because at some point later there's another discussion amongst another group that's going to decide whether to continue to recommend to the president whether they continue working on nuclear devices, and he's opposed to it. Oppenheimer's opposed to that.
But this is after they
This is
dropped the.
Yeah, this is after the dropping of the A bomb. Oppenheimer is opposed to it. Straws is for it because they believe that that information leaked from the base that Oppenheimer was mainly part of during the Manhattan Project, which we're going to get to that. In fact, why don't we just kind of talk about that right now? Because I wrote down compartmentalization right here.
I almost immediately because we kind of get this shot where you kind of think that Kitty is an alcoholic because we see through multiple points in the film where she's struggling with like alcohol consumption, but then almost immediately after that we see that they're building Los Alamos.
So
they called it Los Alamos because there's a mountain that's named that, and then they're building a compound.
Compartmentalization here. So basically, they kind of form the Manhattan Project. Now, I'm going to be quite honest here. My entire life, I had just thought the Manhattan Project literally happened in Manhattan. It by far did not. There was a section that was in Manhattan. There was a section that was in Berkeley. There was a section in Tennessee, and I think there was a section one other place. And then one of the other main bases was in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and that's where Oppenheimer was. It was kind of the center point, and that's where they were actually doing the math theory and the and had all the scientists there. They were doing processing the uranium and the plutonium in Tennessee, and I don't remember what was happening at all the other places. But that's basically what was going on there.
But this is where they do the math, and they're afraid that they might blow up the atmosphere of the Earth by detonating a nuclear explosion. Because complicatedly, because these atoms keep expanding.
It's a chain reaction.
It's a chain reaction, and they think that they're going to expand so much that they'll expand into the atmosphere, ignite the atmosphere, cause the atmosphere to explode, destroying the Earth.
Yeah, yeah. And they actually, I wrote this down because I think it's absolutely hilarious that they kind of disproved the math to a point. Again, theories, but the chances of actually blowing up the Earth through destroying the atmosphere was what they called a near zero chance.
I wrote down
which is kind of funny.
Oppenheimer did take the math to
Einstein
and was like, hey, can you look over this? And he was like, I'm just as good at math as you are, which is hilarious to me, thinking like one of the most brilliant minds of history was kind of bad at math, which makes me feel a little bit better because I'm also bad at math.
It was all about theory, right? And his theories were just that, were theories. And it was those development of those theories, though, that, won him the awards and made him such a sought-after scientist. But yeah, so one of the next things that I have right down we're at the same place. Okay, yeah. So Oppenheimer cheated on his wife, who was Kitty at this time, with Jean Tatlock. This is one of those things that kind of comes back to bite him in the butt because Jean Tatlock, I guess, at least at the time of the hearing for his security clearance,
was still
in the Communist Party. So that really looked bad for him.
My next note is that Jean killed herself.
Jean Tatlock does kill herself. Yep, that is one of the next things that happens, which really affects Oppenheimer a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I can definitely see why. It sounded like she was also having some mental issues and had basically called out to him for help, and he basically kind of slept with her and left.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically is what happened, and he was feeling some guilt about that.
My next note is that they let his brother join the project, but there's kind of like a scene before they let his brother join the project where a little bit before that he's talking to this general and he's like, hey, can my brother join the project? And the general's like, no, because your brother is a communist, or at least associated with the Communist Party. And then during this time, he asks again. He's like, look, my brother hasn't been part of the party in years. Can he join? And they let him join the project.
Mostly because he knows a lot about, especially where they were in the desert. He knows a lot about that part.
And then I wrote down Trinity, which
was the testing. Well, go ahead and talk about your next notes because I kind of skip here quite a bit, I think.
So during this time, after his brother gets put on the project, they start getting closer and closer to the testing of this nuclear bomb. I wrote down that he was nervous that it was going to work because they're getting everything ready. It's like in this tall tower. They've got stations where they can kind of watch it like up to 10 miles away, I think. And it took 4 years and $2 billion just for the test. And then it goes into the test, which is like the tensest part of the whole movie because there's this like crescendoing music. Everybody's like getting ready to watch it. It's like you're kind of, not only is Oppenheimer nervous, but like you're kind of nervous too.
Well, there's basically kind of three things that could have happened here, right? It could have completely failed, which it would have just splattered. What they say? They said like all this stuff, basically all this uranium and plutonium or whatever, just could have just scattered across the sands of the desert. It could have succeeded, or it could have over-succeeded and blown up the whole world. So yeah, there was a lot going on. I do want to see. I do think I want to go back now and talk about something that happens during the research portion that is important during the trial for his or the hearing for his security clearance.
Okay.
I think this is kind of important now. There was one of the scientists that was on the research team that Oppie was leading. They call him Oppie sometimes during the movie. Said, well, what about using heavy hydrogen? And then he names off whatever that's called, deuterium or whatever, instead, and kind of talked about making a hydrogen bomb. And that is important later because instead of the atom bomb, which is big and bulky and takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to build, at the beginning of the Cold War, which is kind of where this movie actually really almost starts, you're just seeing a lot of flashback before it. It's so much easier to make. You can build it on the end of a missile and make a hydrogen bomb much smaller and for a lot less money. But I thought it was interesting that through all this, it seemed that Oppie supported and helping develop the atom bomb, but he seemed really against the hydrogen bomb, which I find interesting. So there's kind of two ways that I think that you can think about it. Was he so against the hydrogen bomb because it was better than what he made? It kind of made him look in the past versus this newer, better bomb that was kind of made during, was birthed, at least birthed during his research, or was he against it because he saw the devastation that happened because of his bomb? Mm-hmm. So there's kind of a couple ways to talk about that. I think it's interesting anyway.
But then going back to the testing of the atom bomb is a really cool scene because after the bomb drops, it's just silence. Because that's probably exactly what happened, is that after it dropped, there was just nothing but silence because everybody was quiet to see what was going to happen. And then the bomb, goes up into the air, you get the shock wave, and the sound finally hits again. They don't blow up the earth.
Obviously.
And then they ship the little boy and the fat man out to go be dropped.
Yeah.
And so you see Oppenheimer kind of like from this point on after they ship the bombs out, kind of like pacing and seeming like he's questioning himself. And then in the next scene, after they drop the bomb, and the bomb succeeds, terrible thing. Never should have happened.
The numbers are astronomical. I mean, it devastated the Japanese peoples.
An American who's like, yay, go America, it succeeded to them.
I guess that's something that we should talk about right now. You're looking at the height of World War II. Mm-hmm. We had defeated Germany. Germany had been defeated. America was the savior of the world yet again. World War I, we came in, we helped out, and the world was saved. Hitler, who was an even bigger threat to not just Europe, but potentially the world, had been defeated. There's a big feeling of patriotism within America at this time. Being an American and being a good Democrat, or not a good Democrat, but just a good American who was patriotic was the thing. Boo Japan, boo Germany, all that. So to America, this, what was it? 1 million lives or something like that, or
11 million.
11 million lives were lost because of the the atom bomb. I don't remember the numbers pre-bombing and then the numbers after the bombing because of the fallout, etc. So it was pretty bad.
But anyway, so after the bomb is dropped, I think you definitely see that he realizes what he's done, because during his speech, this kind of like schizophrenia comes back, and he sees images of, white flashes of like the bomb would have caused, and then like people's faces being melted off, and he's like, I think he kind of realizes to himself like, oh my gosh, I'm the reason 11 million people are dead.
Hmm. And I wrote down here, and I even started because I think it was important. I think you kind of, alluded to it here a little bit, but I wrote down, just because you can do something, should you? That sort of almost feels like what you're supposed to walk away with from this movie. He went through this whole thing. He wanted to prove his theory. He proved it, but then he regretted proving it because of the destruction that it wrought. And I think it was not just him. I know because of interviews that happened later that Einstein kind of felt the same way, that his research, 20 years before this, 10, whatever it wasn't 20 years, it was just a few years, but a few years before this ended up leading to the creation of the atom bomb. Yeah.
But after this point, he has a meeting with the president to try and stop the distribution of super weapons.
The working of super weapons, the working of super weapons, specifically the hydrogen bomb.
Yes. And the president's like, why would we do that? And the president, by the way, is played by Gary Oldman. I had no idea. Twice I watched this movie. I love Gary Oldman. He's amazing. So speaking of which, you wanted to talk about the makeup.
Well, this is probably a good place to talk about that. I mean, Gary Oldman.
He has such a specific face.
He does. And you just would not, this looked nothing like him. But in saying that, I didn't know. I knew I recognized the voice of the guy who played Strauss. I was like, man, this voice is so familiar, but I have no clue who this actor is. And we were talking about the main actors of the film later. And I was like, oh, it has... pause again.
Cillian Murphy.
It has Cillian Murphy, who played the Scarecrow, and then that actor who played Strauss was really familiar to me. And Max says, oh, that was Robert Downey Jr. And I was like, no. And it was like, yes. And I was like, no. The makeup in this film
is
fantastic.
Because later in the film, they make Cillian Murphy look really old.
Oh, yeah.
And they do such a good job.
They do such a good job. And they even make Robert Downey Jr. kind of look a little bit like of Strauss.
I'll put some pictures
Louis
in.
Strauss, and looks really like him. So, I kind of go on a bit of a tangent here because I think at this point, so after the bombs have dropped, you kind of start getting the conclusion to all the storylines. So
yes.
that ends up being the conclusion, really, of the Manhattan Project portion of the movie. You get little tastes of it.
Oppenheimer leaves Los Alamos.
Leaves out Los Alamos, and goes on lecture circuit and all that, and ends up being made chairman of the AEC, the Atomic Energy Commission. All this stuff ends up leading up to him having this hearing on his security clearance. And basically what they're wanting to do through this is deny his security clearance because it will ruin his reputation and make him less credible. And he can no longer talk about things that are concerned with as far as national security goes. And it was Strauss who was kind of the head of this, because of Oppenheimer's making fun of him.
Well, he turned in uh, Oppenheimer's security file to
a man that we did not write down his name.
He turned a security file into somebody. This somebody typed up a letter to the FBI, and the FBI got it, and then got it to the people in charge of like the security portion, and then and then Strauss set up the hearing, selected all the members, and
including the lawyer Roger Robb, which was a name I wrote down. I didn't recognize that name.
Yeah.
I meant to look it up later and see kind of what he was known for, but I didn't. But to kind of to cut a long story short, he ended up losing that hearing, and he lost his security clearance. He was still considered up until his death. He was really considered a war hero and the father of the atomic bomb and the person who ended World War II, or who was kind of credited with the big thing that ended World War II.
But then it cuts the end of Strauss's hearing.
And I wrote this Dr. Hill, who they kind of thought was going to support Strauss.
Yes, he's played by the guy who played Freddie Mercury.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, I can't think of his name.
We'll put it at the bottom of this scene here. So he comes in, and instead of supporting Strauss, he comes out adamantly against Strauss and talks about, because of the treatment, and he has some proof. He doesn't even need proofs, but he talks about the reason that he's against Strauss and most of the scientific community is because of his treatment of Robert Oppenheimer, and goes into him choosing the people on the board, etc. That happened there. And so I don't know that I did talk about this, but so Strauss was up for a cabinet position and ends up the vote goes in front of the Senate or whoever makes these votes, and he lost by 2 votes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, I wrote it down. They only talk about the one because it was a senator at the time, John F. Kennedy, who later becomes president. So I kind of wondered if they were hinting around that Strauss had something to do with the assassination of Kennedy. I'm just curious if anybody knows if that's a theory out there. We'd love to see your comments down below. I'm just curious. I have no thoughts on that.
But then,
go ahead.
After the hearing, Strauss's hearing ends, that's kind of where the movie ends, because the next scene is that scene where we see, we didn't talk about it earlier, but it's brought back multiple times throughout the film, where Robert Oppenheimer is talking to Einstein by a lake. We see it towards the beginning of the film, we sort of see it towards the middle of the film, and then we see it again here at the end of the film.
Can I interject just real quick?
Yes.
The reason that it's important is Strauss thinks that Oppenheimer poisoned the scientific community against him by influencing Einstein.
Yeah. And we get the most famous shot in the movie after Robert Oppenheimer speaks to Einstein, and Einstein starts to walk back towards this house area. We see just Cillian Murphy's face, just no life behind those eyes, just
staring off
into outer space. And then the movie ends on a rainy day.
It does. Before that, I do think it's important because Einstein felt guilt about this too, because it was his theories that kind of led up to Oppenheimer's theories. So he says, it's your turn to deal with the consequences of your achievements.
Mm-hmm.
which I think is an interesting phrase. Consequences of achievements. You think of achievements of something that you're kind of congratulated for, that's good for you, but for Robert Oppenheimer and for Einstein and for others, there were definitely some consequences. And I think for Oppenheimer, I think he spent the rest of his life definitely fighting against what he had built. um, so, general thoughts on the movie. We kind of talked about makeup and.
Well, this movie is listed as the best movie of 2023. And I can see why that is. It's a very beautifully shot film. It's very artsy. There's a lot of artsy moments in it. But other than that, because I kind of think the artsiness can be a little bit of a downgrade for this movie just because it makes the movie a little bit longer. Other than that, the makeup's really good. The story is based off of real life, but the way that they did the movie is a little bit confusing, but I do enjoy the story.
I would definitely concur that, especially at the beginning, it was very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I watched it, we talked about this, for like the first hour and a half, I was like, what is going on here? And finally, after I got what was going on, I was like, oh, okay. And then the second watch, I got to enjoy it a lot more. And I concur with Max here, too. This movie was 3 hours long. It could have probably been about 45 minutes shorter just by cutting some stuff down, maybe a little bit out. There was some extemporaneous stuff, like just some long extended scenes that could have probably just been shrunk down just a little bit. And I don't think it would have hurt the storytelling at all. The story is there, the story is good, but it was just a little long.
Other than that.
Music, excellent. Makeup, excellent. Acting, very good. Story was very well done. We highly recommend Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Watched Oppenheimer on
Peacock?
Yes. So if you have Peacock, at least at the time of recording this, it is still available. It's just very good. So our next movie is going to be Max's favorite movie, which is Hereditary. So be prepared.
Sorry, I'm laughing because this is not his favorite movie.
We'll talk about that when we watch that movie. But remember to like and drop us a comment, subscribe, give us some suggestions of some movies that you'd like to see. We've got one more, or two more, Max's favorite and then my favorite. Then we're going to kind of be off sailing our own. I have some thoughts on some things we might do, but give us some suggestions of some movies that you'd like to see us watch and then talk about. But until next time, I'm Dee.
And I'm Max.
And this is Movies to the Max.